Hi, I'm Mr. Miyagi, and this is Mr. Miyagi's Workshop. Well, recently I got an email from a gentleman about how to dismantle the upper end on an XS650. Well, let's get started. One of the major things you need to do, you need to pull the engine. And the next major thing you do, you need to start taking off caps. Now these are 12 millimeter nuts on here. You pull those off. The rest of the caps have 10 millimeter nuts. You get those off. And for demonstration purposes, I'm not going to be pulling nuts and everything off a lot of this stuff. Next, you'll need to pull the cam covers. And we'll do this fast. Now sometimes on these, you're going to need an impact driver. So it'd be very important to buy one of these things just to have them on hand. But there's 3 screws here that hold these caps on. Another thing, there's these little tapered locking washers for those. See them right there. Don't lose them. You can find them again, but sometimes it's difficult. Let me get this last one out of here. And they just come off. Now, if they're a little difficult on getting off there, just take a rubber mallet and very carefully tap them off. Now the next thing that you'd want to do is that I would remove this back breather tube. Now I've already loosened this up. There's a couple different types, but there's 4 screws that hold these in place. So these will just come, they just unscrew and come off out of the way. And why I'm doing that is because there is a nut, or excuse me, there is a bolt, a 10 millimeter bolt that lays right in here that everybody seems to want to forget about when they're trying to get this head off of here. So you want to remove that right off. And you don't want to forget to put that one back when you're putting this together. So that just comes out. Next, you want to remove the 12 millimeter bolts on either side here, down in the spark plug socket area. Now there's also a flat washer down in there that goes with this bolt. And sometimes they come off, sometimes they'll come with it, but you want to make sure those are out and make sure you save it. Now I'm going to get the other one on the other side here. Basically, what you want to do is you also want to remove your oiler. Down here at the bottom, there's usually an attachment point that goes in here. I don't have it on right at the moment, but this is a 22 millimeter nut, and so is the lower. You'd want to remove the oiler top bolts. These have holes in them to allow the oil to come down through. They also have brass washers. You'd want to try to keep these best you can. Want those out of the way. Next, you want to remove the 2 12 millimeter screws or bolts here, and the 2 12 millimeter bolts in the rear. So we've got a 10 millimeter, we've got 2 12 millimeter on each side, and then we have the 4 up here on top. Now we have 8 17 millimeters. We'll just go ahead and pop these off. Now I don't have them all on. Like I said, this is for demonstration only. I've had this motor apart. So now what's going to end up happening, you're going to have some pressure from the valve springs pushing against the rocker arms in here, which is going to help push this upper cap off, the rocker arm box off, that's going to help you get everything apart here. So let's remove these. And I don't know if you can tell, but it's starting to separate on this side. Now there are 8 washers on here, and several of them are sealing washers, which have a rubber base to them. And you got to kind of work them off there. And those are basically located in here. And then we'll have some regular standard steel style. Let me take this other side off. Now, if this rocker box is stuck down a bit, you can get out your rubber mallet and tap. You don't want to tap on the screw parts, the little studs coming out here. You want to tap in the area where the rocker pins are, and that'll loosen up and pull it off. Another thing you'd want to do that helps get this apart, you want to remove the chain adjuster from the back of the motor. What that will do is that will relieve pressure off the timing chain. There are 6 bolts on that hold that in place. I only have 4 because demonstration only. And here again, I've had this one off before, but if you have a problem getting this off, it usually pushes itself off because it's spring loaded. But if you have to, you can always tap down on these to move them off. But there's a bit of a spring in there that holds everything together. All right, so now we've got everything kind of loosened up here. What we need to do is pull the cam out of there. Now, there's a couple ways you can do this. Break the chain if you have a chain breaker, which is a nice unit to have, one of these kits. They're not all that expensive, but something to look into. Or you can remove the cam out of there first. Now, one of the tricks on removing the cam is removing the bearings out. So what you'd want to do is that you wanted to get a little wooden dowel. You don't want to, or a piece of aluminum or something round stock to drive these off. You want to be careful. You don't want to be banging on them really hard. And they'll come right off there. You get one off. And another thing is kind of keep an eye on which side these came off of. I always like to keep that. Drive the other side off. Now that you have the bearings off, you've got everything kind of loosened up here. So what you can do is you can work that chain off around the back side of the cam or to the right of the cam. And get it up there and work it out. Now at this stage you can do one or two things. You can either let the chain drop straight down in there, or you can tie a string onto it. So what you want to do is you want to work that cam out between the stud bolts there and drop it. Another thing too you can do is you can also put a dowel in there. So what we're going to do now is that we need to release this head from the cylinder. So we're going to tap. Here again, we're tapping in spots that aren't going to cause any problems. I don't really like to pry, and I don't like to hit really hard on this. they will come off. What's happening is that you're trying to draw this thing off of those dowel pins underneath there. Now with the line on there, you can just lower that down in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to work this head off. Now what these little dowel pins are that's holding everything tight in place. They're guide pins. So we get this thing off, rock that up off there. Now you've got your head loose. You can put that somewhere safe. Now the next thing is that we got to get the cylinder off. But what I like to do is I like to remove this front chain guide. Now mine's loose because I just put it on there for demonstration purposes. And we get that out of the way. It's only got 2 little screws, or 10mm screws. So the next thing we need to do is that we need to loosen this up. So here again, we're going to tap flat on the fins, not at an angle, because you could break. So what you want to do is flat and flat. All you're trying to do is work this off. Here again, I don't really like to pry. Let me get it going. Now, if you have a problem with getting the pistons to move, what you can do, get that up, lock the cylinder, and tap the pistons down with the butt of a hammer. So when it comes to pulling the pistons, I've already pulled the keepers out of this. One thing I've done is I've put a block underneath these pistons to keep them from falling down. I have a tool here that's specially designed for pulling wrist pins. Now, you can buy one of these, or you can make one up out of a, I don't know, a nut and bolt and a long tube. Once you pull the keeper pins, you can pull the wrist pins out. Now, there's several different ways you can do it. I like using this little tool. You can get them at a lot of auto parts stores. These just screw down on. As you crank these out, it just pulls the pin. And we're out. And then we move right on to do the other one. And just like that, we have all the pistons off. So that's a fairly easy way of hopefully breaking everything down for you guys. Now, if you were going to break the chain, you need one of these little chain breakers for popping these things apart. I don't remember the price on them. I think I bought mine at either Harbor Freight or one of the motorcycle shops. They're pretty simple. They have the driver, drives out the pin. And we have the other end that accepts where the pin will come out of. Doing it on a master link. And we're going to slip it down. So you're going to get part of that that chain link, the pin itself, to go in the hole at the bottom of the unit there. And we have a little tool for turning that. And all that's going to do is push that pin out. Loosen that one up. You get that one loose. Back it up a bit. There is what they call the master link. Now you can do this a couple other ways. You can literally file off those edges. You need to replace this pin, this link anyway, before you put this chain back together again. So now, pins come off. There's the side of the link that's come off. You see how it's pushed the pins through. And now your chain is separated. You just pull that sucker right back out of there. Another thing you can do at this point, if you were going to leave the chain on, you would leave this adjuster in place. Now there's 4 screws that hold this in, and I just dropped one down inside. Isn't that remarkable? That's another thing you got to watch out for, dropping screws. And I dropped another one. And you can pull that out there. Otherwise the chain would still be attached and you would have to wait till you got to where you could flip this over and pull the crank out. It's not that big a deal to break the chain. I showed you how to make a press, but these are a hell of a lot better for what you want to do. The chain break, and this will actually set the new link in place. And it's a nice little kit. It's just something else that's nice to have. You may only use it once or twice, but hell, anytime you make your life a little easier, why wouldn't you? One screw. There's another one down in there somewhere. Well, oh, there it is, right there. All right, 2 screws. One of the other questions I was asked, I want to change my 2-piece push rod to the long one. And the question is, how do I get that ball bearing and that other part of that rod out of there? Well, one of the main things you got to do is that you got to pull the seal, and they don't come out easy because you're going to end up having to replace this anyway. Once you get that seal out of there, you need one of these telescoping magnets that you can push down inside. Boom, there's your ball bearing. And there's the other shaft. Now it's just an easy thing, putting that back in with the new rod. But you got to put a seal in first. And the type of seal you want to get for that is you don't want the one like this one here that has the ridge. You want the smooth one. And you want to put a little goop around that edge when you push that back up in there. And leave it alone. Don't mess with it for a while. Let that goop set up. Okay, another question I was asked is on the rocker arm pin. Which way, if you pull this, which way do they go back in? Well, it really doesn't matter because there's a crisscross pattern. There's a crisscross pattern on this. And the way that these get oiled, the oil comes in from the top up here and then is spread out into here. And then there's a flat wall on the backside. So what ends up happening is that it doesn't matter which way, the oil kind of comes in and goes through and then out these 2 holes right here. So it really doesn't matter which way you put the pins in. And one of the other questions I was asked, how do you pull the pins? Well, let me show you. Handy dandy tool here. Impact driver. pop that head off. One other thing you have to do is that there's a little sleeve that goes in there with an O-ring on it, and what that does is that keeps the oil all in place there. But you got to drive that out of there. So I made up a special little tool for doing that. It's just a piece of 1/2-inch tubing or a 1/2-inch round stock, and all you got to do is just pop it, and you can drive those sleeves right out of there. So now there's your rocker arm pin right there. Well, how do I get that out? Well, I made up another thing. A little piece of 3/4-inch tubing, a piece of all thread, which is a 6x1, and all you're going to do, let me show you on the other one. All you're going to do is you're going to screw that down into that tip. So that's what I'm doing here, is I'm going to screw this down into that tip. Get it down in there a little bit. Get it in there a fair amount of ways before you go. And then you just screw it out. And there you have it, pulled out. Now you might have to hang on to this outer piece a little bit because sometimes it'll spin. Now the question is, well, how do I get them back in? Well, let me show you that one. So you want to make sure that it's lined up, and you want to use something soft. You want to hold your finger on the inside so you feel that pin coming through, because you don't want to go too far. You still have to get the rocker arm in there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take another threaded bolt, a 6x1, slightly tap that till I can feel that it's inside the rocker arm. You just want to keep rocking that back and forth. Now I'm in there. So now we can finish off putting that pin back in. Okay, we're in tight. And here again, you would put your sleeve in, and you would put a new O-ring on there and drive it back into place. And since I'm going to take this all apart again, I'm just going to tap that down in there. And you might want to use a wooden dowel. And there you go. Cap back on with another O-ring. Well, I hope this episode on removing the upper end on an XS650 has helped. We went over all the type of tools that you might need, from removing the bearings off of a cam with a wooden dowel so you don't have to break the chain. Rubber mallets for breaking the seals loose on the heads and on the cylinder. What type of puller you should use for extracting the pin from the wrist pin from the piston. General tools for the top bolts and everything. 17 millimeter, 12 millimeter, and a 10 millimeter should handle it. Another thing that I didn't touch on is a nice little fork deal for pulling out the little keeper clips inside your piston. When you're removing the rocker arm pin, what you might need, like an impact wrench that you can buy at probably any auto parts store. You can also get them at Harbor Freight. What the heck, they're out there. If you were going to break the chain, I would suggest you get one of these kits. They work well. They're not that expensive, but it's nice to have something that works like it's supposed to for breaking the timing chain, removing the link from there. It has everything that you might need, and it also will help put it back together again. Removing the pins on the rocker arms, where this will remove the little sleeves that fit up inside your head here. It's just a simple thing of tapping those things out. I just took a piece of 1/2-inch tubing and made it long enough to knock the sleeves out. I also took a piece of 3/4-inch tubing and a flat washer. Now I tack mine on, you don't have to. I picked up a piece of all thread from the hardware store. This is a 1x6 thread and a couple of nuts. I double Loctited them up at the top, and then I have the one that actually literally pulls the unit out. So you would just tighten that down to extract the pin. Now to place the pin back into place, I just have a 1x6 bolt that I screw into the end of the pin and tap that into place, because all you're going to do is just drive that back in there, being careful. And I would lubricate those pins when you're putting those in for the final installation. Another little tool that you might need, now you could use a screwdriver for pulling these clutch rod seals, or you can also use something like this on this line for popping them out. This is a rubber tool for installing the rubber on a windshield. It comes in handy for a lot of just little things that I need to pry out. And another thing that you would want to buy and have on stock is one of these little magnets. These telescoping magnets come in handy. They're great for reaching up inside and pulling out the ball bearing and the other shaft on the other clutch rod for the 2-piece clutch rod setup, so that you can install the single piece. I hope that we've covered everything. I know I forget stuff that I do naturally and everything. So if there's any questions or comments, put them in the section below, or send them to my email at tmiyagi@hotmail.com. So if you've liked this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget that ringy-dingy button. And be safe out there. Hope to see you on the road. So this is Mr. Miyagi signing off.